and welcome everyone to an evening that I know is going to be one of inspiration and compassion. As many of you know, this event was originally scheduled to be in person in 2020 at our local theater in St. Albert, but like so many areas of our lives, the pandemic drastically altered those plans. David Maginley comes to you tonight from beautiful Halifax, Nova Scotia. It is 10 p.m. there right now, so thank you, David, for the late evening. And we are in a studio in Edmonton. By moving to a virtual event, we can share David's message right across the province, which is amazing. An event like this would not have happened without the unwavering support of the generous sponsors. In particular, I would like to acknowledge Nouveau Dental, a presenting sponsor, and the partners, the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta, JetPro, and the St. Albert Community Foundation. The gold sponsors, Service Credit Union, Midwest Property Management, and Neil Rouse Realty, have been and continue to be strong supporters of SASHA. I hope you had a little bit of an opportunity to check out all of the sponsors in the program and on SASHA's website, which is www.sasha-cares.com. For those of you who don't know very much about SASHA, SASHA's mission is to support, educate, and empower those who are affected by or caring for a person with a life-limiting illness in the community. The hope is that tonight's event shows SASHA's commitment to making this happen. We have an inspiring, compassion-focused evening planned. It is wonderful. You are going to love it. So this is how things are going to go. First, David Maginley will speak for about 40 minutes on unpacking for the journey. Then we have three incredible panelists who are here. We're going to have a discussion and we are going to answer all of your questions. So please be sure to submit your questions at any point throughout the night. You might notice that there is a little bit of a chat box. So please put in your questions. You don't have to put your name if you don't like, but it would be wonderful to have you interact and be a part of our question and answer. So please put in those questions throughout the night at any point. So without further delay, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's keynote speaker. David Maginley is an interfaith spiritual counselor at the QE2 Health Sciences Center in beautiful Halifax, Nova Scotia, and award-winning author of Beyond Surviving Cancer and Your Spiritual Journey. David has also survived cancer 4 times, which led to a profound near-death experience and explorations in the nature of consciousness and the connection of body, mind, and spirit. With degrees in philosophy and as an ordained minister, David has a deep sense of purpose in supporting others in their spiritual journey. He knows cancer from both sides of the hospital bed and has a sense of this life from both sides of the veil. Please join me in welcoming David Maginley.
Thank you so much, Carmen. And thank you to the St. Albert Sturgeon Hospice Association for pulling this together. We wanted to do it in 2020, and thanks to the persistence and the vision of the board, and especially Dr. Moritores, we were able to pull this together. And I'm so grateful because it is such an important topic. We are all going to make that final journey. And there is nothing wiser than preparing well by unpacking for the journey. I know that this can be a subject that stirs the deepest anxiety in people. I hope to alleviate that anxiety, to address it, and to help give you a compass, a way to navigate this final frontier, the final voyage, and prepare for it well. Because we discover, I've been learning after over 20 years supporting people at the edge of mortality, I've discovered that unpacking for the journey, preparing for this final voyage, is profoundly straightforward, but it requires vulnerability and great courage. I'm so grateful that the patients have taught me more than I can even express. This sort of work, providing spiritual care to hundreds and thousands has deepened my humanity. It has refined my love. It has shaped me into what I hope is a better human being. So I want to share some of that insight with you, some stories, and I hope that you can also gain the insight and the courage to begin having difficult conversations that are really important with your family, especially if you are facing a serious illness. So thank you for being with us and for interacting with us. I'm going to be watching the chat section as I can, which is over there on my screen, but really, really just want to touch your hearts and begin with a person who touched mine deeply. I'm so grateful that the people who taught me first how to love also taught me how to leave. And I want to introduce you to this is a man who was always prepared well for the journey. And here he is, dressed as St. Nicholas in the little town of Mahone Bay. This village is picturesque. And my father was St. Nicholas every Christmas season for so many years. And whenever I went down at Christmas to see him on the streets, wishing people good cheer and the best of the season, I became a 10-year-old boy once again. My heart was filled with joy because for me, Santa was real. And my father was a naval commander, a naval historian. He had sailed those seas for all of his career since he was a teenager. And when he received the diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, he took it as a captain does. I was sat with him in the doctor's office when he received the diagnosis and the terminal prognosis. He sat back, he took a breath, and he looked at the doctor and he said, "Well, I guess this is it then. I'm 91. It's a pretty good run." And then he looked at me, and then he looked at the doctor, and he simply said, "I suppose then there's nothing more you can do for me." And the doctor was so compassionate and said, "Yes, but it's been a privilege supporting you and helping you." And he said, "Thank you, doctor, for all that you've done. I have some planning to do." And with that, he rose and we walked out to the car where we sat in the sunshine. And I gazed at a man who I knew in some ways I was a stranger to me. There were so many dimensions to his story, to his person, that I still wanted to know. I didn't want him to leave yet. On the drive home, we started sharing the stories of childhood, his childhood, reflecting on life, the stories of his adventures at sea, and the stories of how he came to this point. And like so many people, he had to acknowledge, my goodness, my life has flown by so quickly. The decades gone in a blink. "Isn't it funny?" he said. "I've had so many wonderful friendships, great marriage, and you kids are wonderful. I think I'm going to be okay." There isn't a more profound thing that a child can be told other than, "I'm proud of you, I thank you, and I love you." My father stayed at home, and the palliative team came and provided care. We, his children, five of us, I'm the middle child, we surrounded him with love. Grandchildren came and other relations and friends, and we enfolded him in love and excellent medical care, all under the guidance of the Hospice and the Palliative Care Association here. Their hand helped us walk him home, and that ultimately is what we're all here for. We're all walking each other home. My father was able to say those four most important words. Now, please don't wait until you have a serious illness to say these words. And here they are. Actually, no, these are the four most significant things on a person's heart as they approach the end of life. We'll get to the four most important words shortly. So when a person is dying, their main concern is for their loved ones, the burden of care upon their loved ones' hearts. And that's beautiful because it speaks of the goodness of their own heart. of their concern for others. It also indicates that at the end of life, it's all about the unfinished love stories. The second concern is suffering. Will I end up in the ICU? How will my body deteriorate? How can we mitigate the suffering as I move closer to death? That's an important thing to talk about, of course, with your healthcare provider and with your palliative care team. Things like, will I be in pain? How do I know the disease is advancing? How will my body change? Will I become dependent, uh, not able to walk? Will I be bedbound? What can we do to make that as smooth as possible? The third thing on people's hearts is represented by all those files. It's the unfinished business of life. Now, that is not so much the taxes, though I hope you got yours done. It really pertains to the unspoken stories, the critical words of reconciliation and forgiveness, the unfinished dreams. People tend to reflect not upon what they accomplished in life, but they, in terms of regrets, they tend to think about what they didn't try, what they didn't embark, how they didn't follow their dreams. So the unfinished business. Then the final thing on people's minds and hearts as they're approaching the end of life is that final frontier. What waits for me on the other side? What is this life all about? Well, on that, I can confidently say, we're all going to find out one day, aren't we? So, having the important conversations, telling your loved ones the important simple words. This was summed up so beautifully by Dr. Ira Byrock. Now, he wrote a classic book, which I highly recommend. Here it is. And of course, here it's summed up in please forgive me, right? I forgive you and thank you and I love you. I would add to that a fifth, which is, of course, goodbye, or I'll see you on the other side. Forgiveness. When we do not know how to love, we end up injuring the people we love. I have never met a soul who left this world who did not have some rubble of relationships in the wake of their journey. I found everyone is in need of some repair. Those are difficult conversations. And it's surprising because when we do them, we often find out that the burden or the unfinished homework of the heart that we've been carrying for years was inconsequential to the other person. I was speaking with a patient the other day who was making a good effort at phoning all the people that he had known to say goodbye and apologize for any shortcomings in the relationship or any words that he had said which stuck within his heart and which he knew I could have loved better. And so many of the people he spoke with said, gee, I didn't remember that. He had been carrying that burden all along. But in asking for forgiveness and reconciliation, he was releasing the pain, unpacking for the journey, saying, forgive me, I forgive you, saying, thank you, I appreciate you. You have been part of my journey. You have helped to shape me into the person that I am. And I thank you for that. That's really important. That is empowering because you, even in your frailty, are lifting other people up. What a beautiful experience. And then to say, of course, the ultimate words, I love you. When we love, our consciousness connects. I like to say that love connects consciousness and creativity expands consciousness. That's why when we lose someone we love, we lose part of ourself, part of our very being. We are who we are through our relationships. So saying I love you affirms that you are connected. And I actually trust that even death can't destroy that connection. Love, I suspect, is actually the nature of God and perhaps the metaphysical fabric of the universe. What a beautiful thing to imagine. So those are details of the heart in how you can unpack for the journey. But there are some practical things you need to do as well. And one of the great developments in end of life care, especially in North America, is this is the national website for advancedcareplanning.ca. An advanced care plan is a document that you work on with your family and your doctor. And it helps you identify what's most important to me. So the first step in an advanced care plan is to think about your values. These pertain to what's important to me as I die, as I leave this world. Well, my independence, my dignity. I had one woman say to me, cheesecake. Cheesecake is important to me, and I want that around. Flowers, I want the fragrance of them. Music, and she had her favorite musician come and visit her frequently. We have a lot of great musicians here in Halifax, so it's just a treat. So you think about, okay, what's important to me for my comfort? Do I want to stay in my home? Do I want to go to the hospice? Right? And how can my unique identity in this world be best honored and then released? The second thing is to learn about your overall health situation. So this is getting a roadmap. It's critical for unpacking for the journey to know where you are on the journey. So asking your doctor, your nurse, your palliative team, what is the health status? Where is the disease? How will it compromise my functioning, my autonomy? Will I be able to continue walking? Will I need a commode? Will I need a bed in my home? When would I know I need to go to the hospital? Those are great questions. The third step is to decide who will speak for you. An advanced care plan, and I want to emphasize this, an advanced care plan means you will be asking someone to be your voice. So that's called different things in different provinces. Sometimes it's a proxy, sometimes it's an agent. Um, this person will speak for you when you can no longer speak for yourself. That's to ensure that your wishes are fulfilled, because there will come a point, especially with excellent medical care and proper pain management, where you will become groggy, sleepy. Your ability to communicate will gradually be compromised with a progressive disease. So commit to have someone speak for you, someone you trust. Now, a lot of people struggle on that one. Who on earth do I pick? Perhaps you are a widower and you have 3 children. You may be tempted to choose the child who lives closest to you, right? That may not always be the best. You want to pick the person you feel is best qualified to honor your wishes. So that's an important one. Step number 4 is to talk. Once you've decided all these things and you've made some notes, talk about your wishes, your desires, talk about it with your doctor and with your family. They can then help you consider new things that you may not have imagined, um, new considerations, new possibilities. I remember one fellow, in speaking with his family, he came to realize that one of the key things he wanted, sort of a bucket list item, was to rent a convertible and go for ice cream at the beach. And he was able to do that even in very frail health. Of course, his wife drove, but what a great wish. And then the final one is write your advanced care plan. So great thing is if you go to advancedcareplanning.ca, all the documents are going to be there. You can find individuals and families. You see that up on the top, and you click on that and all the documents, even suggest questions to help open up difficult conversations. And there are videos about how other people have done this. Now, each province has their own, and here's the one from Alberta. So I'm going to leave that slide up there for a little bit if you want to get a pen and write this down. myhealth.alberta.ca/health topics/advanced care planning. Let's acknowledge these are, again, difficult conversations to have. And a lot of people hesitate because they think, well, isn't this giving up? No, this is giving yourself to what you know will happen. Because, of course, death is a 100% statistic. And when you have an advanced disease, when you have a progressive condition that likely will end your life, then that's a great motivation to do the homework of the heart. But you don't need to wait until you're sick. You don't need to wait until you have a diagnosis. You can do it now. In fact, when you're healthy, that's one of the best times because you can revise it afterwards. There's no problem with that. You can revise it anytime you want. So you make a copy of this and give one to your doctor, give one to your proxy or the person who will speak for you, and then keep one in your home. Now, there's a tradition in many provinces that where do you keep this? Don't put it in a filing cabinet or anything. You put it on the fridge. I know that can sound kind of odd, but a lot of people find that if you put it in an envelope, like one of those clear plastic ones, and you put it on the fridge, especially if, of course, you're at home with a progressive disease, then that's where the paramedics know to look. It's must be an unspoken rule across the country, but they all know the advanced care plan is going to be on the fridge in that folder. So have a look at advancedcareplanning.ca. Really encourage you to do that. All of this, preparing for the final journey, is going to trigger grief. Grief is a noble aspect of your humanity. It is a testament to your beautiful heart. Only a person who is emotionally healthy and has the ability to love also has the ability to grieve. So I encourage you to embrace your grief because it honors the other person. There are two trajectories. The family members, any loved ones, they go through anticipatory grief, and that can feel surreal, right? And your mood can fluctuate up and down. You can become very down, very stressed, very animated, energy all over the place. It intensifies your attachment to your loved one. Of course it does. And that helplessness to prevent their death, that worry about their suffering can feel debilitating. It's normal. And I encourage you to sit at your loved one's side and to, if not share the tears, because you know family members will protect their loved one from their tears, and the loved one who's dying will protect the family members from their grief. Simply say, I'm grieving. Place it on the table, acknowledge it within each other. And it will also notice it will strengthen the bonds amongst the family members because a grief shared is half as heavy. It's really important. So you, as a loved one, are going through anticipatory grief. The person who's dying is going through preparatory grief. We prepare to say goodbye to that individual. They prepare to say goodbye to reality. The scale of their grief is so great, even they cannot integrate it, comprehend it, or process it all at once. We all will experience this. Thankfully, I find everyone is wired with the wisdom, if we can only unlock that through compassionate care, the wisdom to grieve beautifully. For the one dying, depression is common, and it is a functional state, as are all of the difficult emotions around end of life process. Those are functional states: sadness, depression, grief, worry, anxiety. Now, what do I mean by that? I don't want to give that away too quickly, but these are not without purpose. They have a profound role in your transformation to come. Those who are preparing to die often are facing it better than those who are family members and loved ones. Why? I'm still trying to figure that one out. It's as if they're contemplating it perhaps from the moment of diagnosis. They are preparing in small bits, here and there, a thought, a word, a contemplation in the dark of the night. They are preparing to leave. So they're working on this 24/7, even in their sleep. It's fascinating to speak with those with advanced disease and ask, how are your dreams? Because dreams give this window to the subconscious and they unlock the wisdom that's waiting to be discovered and guide you home. Grief is part of that process. It is profoundly difficult, but profoundly beautiful. Now, one of the most difficult aspects of preparing for the final journey is distress. Specifically, existential distress is anything that threatens the integrity of the identity of the individual, right? So when all that I know of who and what I am is being eroded by suffering, I'm no longer able to work, then I'm no longer able to drive, then I'm no longer able to play the role I did in my family, contributing to the household, cooking a favorite meal. My life is being diminished and eroded by my disease, and I don't like it, of course. So then worry kicks in, right? Who and what I am in the world is dissolving. Of course, that's going to challenge my very existence. And this type of distress can only be alleviated through good, compassionate listening, right? Being able to tell your story, to process these emotions because they're aching to be given a voice, to be shared, to be normalized, to be embraced. And then through that process, you find that you have the feelings, but they don't have you. No one's consistent with that, but everyone's wired with the ability because we want to feel safe. How can that be possible when we are preparing to leave this world? I have found that that safety is not through something that is fixed, though of course pain has to be well controlled. But that safety is found simply in the compassion. And this is really where hospice and palliative care shine, right? Because compassion is that ability to navigate the storm without capsizing. So here I am in Nova Scotia. Sailing is a huge thing here. And on the bottom of a sailboat, my father taught me this well. On the bottom of the sailboat is a big weight called the keel, and it's a counterweight because when the wind hits the sail, the boat leans. The counterweight under the water prevents it from capsizing. Compassion will keep you upright in the water. More than that, compassion will enable you to use the wind, the storm of suffering, distress, and the emotions to not capsize, but then to move forward towards deeper connection to yourself, to hidden aspects of who and what you are in the world, as well as to others. So that's, of course, part of what I do. As a chaplain, I help people process their distress. And a lot of people wonder, they get nervous when a chaplain comes in the room. They say, I'm not very religious, right? Which is an endearing apology of some sorts. But I tell them it's okay. It's not about religion. Think of it this way. Spirituality is about your love. If God is love, then those are synonyms. And that also means that love is not an emotion. Love is the highest state of consciousness. Therefore, your spiritual health is determined much more by the quality of your love than it is by the content of your belief. That's something to consider. How do I love? Because that was the crux of the teachings of Jesus and of any healthy religious tradition. How do you care and love yourself, your neighbor, this world? The whole world could use a lot more love. So when a chaplain walks in the room, when I walk in the room, I'm checking on a few things. This is part of helping you unpack for the journey. I call it the 5 R's, right? A lot of people are struggling and they're asking, why did I get this disease? And I always encourage them to, or help them move from that question, why did I get it, to the question of, what am I going to do with it? How can I use my disease, my illness, my suffering to amplify my love and deepen my humanity and repair the broken bits of my life, right? How can I use it to connect even more with the beautiful gift of ordinary moments? So you want to build reason in suffering. The second is reflection. So I sit and I say, tell me about your journey. Tell me about the road you've traveled that ended up here. Especially tell me about the unfinished love stories, because that's the most poignant and beautiful. I'll check on religion. Do you have a spiritual practice that supports you, right? How can I help support that, right? So for those who, Islamic, we take a piece of tape and put it where Mecca will be, provide a prayer mat if possible, see if they need to contact an imam, provide a Quran, lots of wonderful ways to support that. Checking on relationships is critical, right? How are your relationships? Are there any conversations you need to have? This is really important. And then restoration, not so much with the other people, right? That's going to happen. But first, it's got to happen with yourself. You know that we are our own worst critics. We beat ourselves up endlessly. We have that critical voice that knocks us down. How can you be kind to yourself? As you're moving towards the end of life, you may have unrealistic expectations of yourself. You may be overwhelmed by what you perceive as the burden of care that you're placing upon your family. I encourage you to embrace their care as an act of love and realize you are now in the critical key position to teach the ultimate lessons of life to those you love. Those are lessons about self-compassion. So the critical things are the reconciliation with yourself. We have a critical voice inside that's always beating ourselves up, and we feel that at the end of life. To let that go, to understand where it came from, right? And then to have a sense of release, to realize that it wasn't as dominant as you thought it was. There are various approaches to do this. Here are a few. Dignity therapy is listening to that life story. Narrative inquiry is exploring the meaning of them. Somatic therapy is a beautiful thing that involves embodiment, right? To move consciously into perhaps your pain or your heartache and to listen to what it's saying, right? Our relationship with ourself will determine our experience of any moment. So to have a compassionate relationship with yourself is the ultimate beautiful gift that you can give even as you're only able to lie in the bed. Logotherapy, of course, this was developed um, by Viktor Frankl and is another meaning-making approach. So there are various counseling techniques, but meditation I have found to be profoundly significant. Now, there's a difference. Mindfulness is meditation in the moment. Meditation is drawn out, like 30 minutes, 20 minutes, a more prolonged period. And it is essential that one practice that you be kind to yourself. It's called matri. So in meditation, you're observing your own experience. And you can do this in the hospital bed or at home. You can just observe your experience and realize, I have my thoughts. I have my feelings. They don't have me. They are fleeting and they flow by. They are not essential to who I am. So meditation is beautiful. I've used this with people in quite significant suffering. And in Tonglen, they move into their suffering, identify where it is in the body, sense how it is moving, right? Because pain never stays still, and then draw in more of it from anyone else who is also suffering. You are now practicing compassion for them, and it changes your relationship to your own suffering. Just beautiful. And then direct experience is that in which you step back from your thoughts, your feelings, even your body. You're observing this. And then you step back and go, well, who am I? What am I? Am I my experience? Am I my story of life? Now we're beginning to help you distinguish the story from the storyteller, because a transformation is coming and you do not, in fact, you cannot understand what it is. Now, I want to share just amazing mystical things that the majority of patients experience at the end of life. And it's called nearing death awareness. Anne was with her husband, who was holding her hand as she died. They meditated together every night for over 20 years, because so long ago, but just yesterday to them, their son, who was only 17, died in a tragic accident. So the night before Anne died, she opened her eyes, and there stood her son at the foot of the bed. Simply astonishing. And they communicated pure consciousness to consciousness. And she was filled with a peace, a feeling utterly safe in love. When I arrived the next day, I found a friend sitting there with them, and Anne had just passed. But George looked up at me, and he was tears in his eyes, and he said, I'm so confused. How can this be so heartbreaking and yet so beautiful at the same time? Because she unpacked for the journey, because they said the four most important words: thank you, I love you, forgive me, and goodbye. And because they were confident that she did not stop when her body did. In the care of the palliative team, in the comfort of love, death turned out to be something she discovered she could do, unimaginable 2 years earlier. But there she was, moving with an equanimity towards wonder. Dr. Christopher Kerr at Buffalo Hospice in New York, and he wrote a beautiful book about some research on end-of-life dreams and visions. And he found that the majority of his patients, 88%, reported having an end-of-life experience, a mystical connection to, usually it's the welcoming party, the welcoming committee, right? Over 99% reported these experiences as more real than this reality. It sounds astonishing, but it's universal. It doesn't matter what the belief system is, what the age or education of the person is. It doesn't matter if they have a faith or don't. This is a universal phenomenon because it speaks not to religion. It speaks to the mystery of consciousness, and that becomes paramount when we're approaching the end of life. We must keep the body comfortable, but consciousness is undergoing a transformation. And here's the gem that I was hinting at earlier. If there's any takeaway from this presentation, let it be this: suffering and then dying deconstruct our ego identity in the reverse order that it was formed as a preparation for transformation. This is a natural process. So here's what I mean. We come into this world, we're a blank slate. We're not able to differentiate even from ourselves in the environment. But then there's a contraction of consciousness, and we realize we are in an environment. And then the second contraction of consciousness happens when we realize there's moving things and inanimate things in the environment. So we're beginning to form object relations, differentiation, forming identity of me. The final contraction is information which I cannot integrate into my identity, I put into my subconscious, and that becomes my homework through the rest of my life. Then, as we're dying, the reverse process happens. Material from my subconscious is brought up to the surface through my suffering. All the stuff I've been suppressing, all the unfinished homework of my soul, that comes up. And it's aching to be addressed and integrated. Then there's a second expansion in which I'm feeling a oneness with everything. And it's quite difficult to explain. It is also marked by a period of despair and wilderness. This is the functional emotions which are deconstructing ego identity. It's the most difficult part of leaving this world. The final stages are marked by an astonishing peace, equanimity, and even rapture. I don't know how many patients have told me they perceive their loved ones who have passed on standing right there in the room, or they feel the room filled with light and peace. It's so astonishing. This is a movement in spiritual terms from when we're talking about prayer, when we're talking about relating to that realm. It's a movement from petitioning or lifting one's prayers and hopes to an external deity or realm to now participating in that dimension of consciousness. Consciousness, this animating life force that you are using right now to listen to me, is the greatest mystery to science and the final frontier at the end of life. Not ever fully prepared, but we can begin. And I am so blessed because I actually had a peek at the other side during one of my rounds with cancer. I have a cancer called paraganglioma, and it makes a Molotov cocktail of chemicals, norepinephrine, dopamine. And when my adrenal gland turns on, it triggers the tumor to blow. And one Sunday, I was doing a service and the tumor blew. I was in a hospital chapel. That's a good place to go. And I was gone. I collapsed. My heart stopped. I was gone for 15 minutes. And this tree, this grassy hill, this is an image representing what I saw. The colors were more real and dramatic. The tree was achingly drinking in the light, and I was one with it all. It was a state of reality, more real than this. And this is a surprisingly common phenomenon. 1 in 10 people who have a cardiac episode will have a mystical experience. It could be as high as 1 in 5. You probably know someone who's had one of these, but we don't share it because we worry that it wasn't real. Maybe it was a dream. We worry about people dismissing it, right? Because this is a sacred experience. In mine, I was walking on this grassy hill and I wasn't alone. I actually encountered a being, masculine figure, eminently filled with love and compassion, um, power, a great sense of humor. He felt like my best friend. And I was simply saying, I'm here, I'm home, I'm home. That word is often used because you are now congruent. There's no aspect of yourself that is suppressed. There's no subconscious anymore. You are integrated and authentic and connected and whole and one with everything. So you're home. And he said, rather casually, it's great to see you, David. It's great that you're here. And I said, come on, let's run to the tree. And he said, you can't go up there. We have to talk about things. Things are going well, but you have a lot of work to do. You can't stay here. And I complained, and I didn't want to know. I didn't want to know what the work was. I certainly didn't want to come back here. We talked. I protested. He then turned to me and he put his hand on my shoulder and he filled me with this love. And he just said, look, it's okay. You have a lot of work to do, but we'll see you later. We'll be with you. You won't be alone. We'll see you later. Boom. I was back. That's the hardest part. That is really difficult to become incarnate once again after experiencing such an expansive state of consciousness. But that was 30 years ago, and I think I'm doing some of the work they asked me to do. Are these exceptional experiences? Do these only happen to ancient mystics or faithful neighbors, but never to you? Well, apparently not. Almost 100% of people experience these. Amidst the general population, 94% in their study had experienced phenomena that were not explainable by normal Newtonian physics and normal reality. Those who were really enthusiastic about it, of course, felt they had many more. But they wondered, how about the most critical minds among us? They thought scientists and engineers surely would only have like maybe 2 or 3% of them have experienced such phenomena. Almost 100%. And how could it be otherwise if we live in a reality that arises from consciousness? Then this sort of phenomenon is going to be much more common. As it was, at 4 o'clock in the morning, with his best friend at his side, he opened his eyes. He came out of unconsciousness, and then amazingly, he lifted himself up, sitting upright, with an incredibly swollen abdomen and muscles that had just deteriorated. Strength came from, I don't know where, but he rose himself up and he looked up and he smiled and he lifted up his arms and he said, yes, yes, come, I'm ready. And he said a few names of people who had already passed. And then he sank back down, closed his eyes, never spoke again. We're all headed to wonder. We're all going to find out one day. How can we have a smooth trip? Say the important words. Thank you, I love you, forgive me, and see you later. Make your wishes known. Fill out an advance care directive, right? Talk with your family about the reality of dying. Realize you don't need to protect them from the emotions, and talking about this doesn't speed the process up. It connects hearts in the most beautiful way, because you want to leave this world heart light in both weight and luminance. So here's some recommended reading. The first is Final Gifts. This is about nearing death awareness, that mystical phenomenon, and it's really great. The second is The Grace in Dying. It gives a roadmap, a cartography, right? A detailed map of the inner process of the experience of eco-deconstruction and how to do that gracefully. That's the book. And then this book, let me move over here, Nearing the End of Life. This is a PDF download. Maybe if you're watching on your computer, do a screen capture right now so you can get that web address, or you can just put in Nearing the End of Life, Peter Fenwick. Fantastic. So this book is also pretty good. I'm really grateful that it has supported thousands of people, so many more than I could do individually one-on-one. It took me years to write that, mostly years of procrastinating, but then it erupted from me one evening after a difficult case, and I'm so grateful for what it's done. So grateful for the palliative and hospice care teams. I'm so grateful for this life, and being sent back isn't so bad now. May you unpack well for your journey. May you not wait until you're receiving a diagnosis, right? May you say the important words and feel the gift of this beautiful life and realize there's an adventure ahead. And if you're trying to figure out what to do spiritually, just focus on your love. You can't do any better than that. Focus on your love and shine, because the world needs your light. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I hope I haven't gone too long.
Mhm. No, David, you have not gone too long. I hope you can hear me okay.
I can,
Okay,
thanks, yes.
wonderful. Well, I will say I had some goosebumps when you started to speak about the tree and the meadow and what you saw and heard on the other side. We all kind of looked at ourselves and here, at each other in here, and just thought, wow, thank you so much for sharing that. It is time now to introduce our panelists. We're going to have a wonderful discussion. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are at home, please be sure to send in your questions through the Q&A box. We'll get to those and we'll just have a nice chat. So to my left, I would like to introduce Dr. Ingrid de Kock. Dr. de Kock currently serves as the Edmonton Zone Palliative Care Services Medical Director. She is also the lead for the Palliative Care Community Consult Team. In that role, she provides consulting services to the community in homes and in medical facilities. Next to Dr. de Kock, we have Dr. Barbara Fisher. Dr. Fisher is Assistant Clinical Professor in the Department of Family Medicine in the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry at the U of A. Along with her general practice in St. Albert, she is also part of the medical staff at Foyer Lacombe Hospice. And last but certainly not least, we have Chris Guest. Chris is a retired nurse who has worked and lived in St. Albert for more than 30 years. Many of her years of nursing have been with palliative patients. She is also a board member with SASHA and has been instrumental in developing SASHA's Compassionate Care Volunteer Program. So thank you everyone so much for being here today. David, if you don't mind, I might start with you. You spoke about these difficult discussions. It's not an easy thing to talk about, dying with loved ones. And I'm curious, when do these discussions happen? Because you had said, you know, not when you're in the middle of this illness, but when do you suggest starting this conversation?
Yes, it's good to give a heads up to your loved ones that you want to have this chat. So first pick one person that you feel would be comfortable talking about it and sit down and say, I'd like to talk about something really important that I hope is a long way off. That's a good introductory sentence. If you go to advancedcareplanning.ca or the Alberta site, it's going to give you some good opening lines to begin the conversation. They even have a game, a card game you can download and play to open the conversation up in the family. You don't need to wait until you're
Okay.
ill.
That's one way to do it, make it fun, I suppose. I guess it's a difficult thing to do. So if you have a loved one, maybe I'll open this up to the panel. If you have a loved one who is dying and is stressed about it, going through this depression that David has spoken about, how do you even begin to calm someone who's going through this? What are some things that you might say and do? Maybe Dr. de Kock, I'll start with you.
You know, I think one of the most important things is, first of all, to ask the person how much they want to talk about it, you know, how engaged they want to be. I think sometimes just asking the question opens the gate. And then one can take it from there. And it's not us providing the answers. It's really the person has all those answers themselves. It is just finding them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course, when someone is going through this process, there's a team of family members. We'll talk about caregivers in a little bit here, but how do you go about supporting someone as well who is dealing with a loved one who is dying? What are some things that you can do to support someone who's helping someone who's going through this process, maybe as a friend or a family member? Dr. Fisher, is there anything that you would suggest?
Well,
My role, I think just letting them know that they're not alone and they have a whole team of people that are there to help them and want to help them, and making it really easy for them to reach out and get that help, because they feel guilty passing along to someone else sometimes. So, and then really checking in just to see if they are looking after themselves, like do they feel safe leaving the house? Can they take a break? Who can they call upon? Just trying to help them think through any barriers that they have considered, right?
Right, yeah. Caregivers, I think we all know of someone who's been a caregiver, know of someone who's currently a caregiver. I know for myself, I know someone who's in that situation. Maybe, Chris, I'll toss things to you. What is a caregiver?
So I think we would define a caregiver as someone who is providing care for anyone who could be either ill or have some disability that they need help with, or elderly person who needs help, but they're in an unpaid situation. So they're not a paid person. So that would be a caregiver. And you're right, there's many, many caregivers out there that need support.
Who need support, you're right. And the support, so how do we navigate that? I know, David, you put up some really wonderful websites, and this must be something that you hear. This isn't a St. Albert situation, this isn't an Alberta situation, this is everywhere. I mean, where do I get support? I guess maybe locally, how does someone navigate the system if they know that they have a loved one who's going to be going through this process? Where does it begin?
I think that the system here in Alberta, we are, I think, fairly lucky compared to many other areas in the country, that there is a lot of palliative support available. But you're right, how does one access that? How do you know? You've just been told by your doctor that you have, especially cancer, which is the big scary one for many people. And where do you go? I do think that, especially with cancer in Alberta, there is already a fairly good connection between cancer care and the palliative care services. It does fall, though, to the oncologist in that situation to really start pointing the person in that
the right
direction.
direction.
Now, it is much more difficult when it is, say, somebody has heart failure. The only cure for heart failure in the end will be a heart transplant. And most patients do not qualify for that. And so if you are told that you've got heart failure, really at that moment, you are a palliative care patient, and you could very much benefit from a palliative care approach to your disease. And I think there is still a huge gap. We as professionals and as volunteers and as caregivers who have some information, we really need to spread the word that palliative care is no longer just cancer related. Luckily, we've long ago, many decades ago, realized that a palliative care approach, kind of a whole-centered, patient-centered care, it should really be provided as soon as you've had a diagnosis of an illness that is eventually going to take your life.
So is that, I was going to ask, how do you know when palliative care is needed? How is that decided, Dr. Fisher?
It can be tricky. Sometimes there's a really definitive event that happens that clearly affects that person's health, that everybody understands their palliative and that their life is very much shortened from what they may have wished. And you typically think of the cancer patient who has exhausted the treatments available at the Cross Cancer Institute. But then there's the other chronic diseases that just just progress very, very gradually, and that person is just becoming more and more fragile, and they can clearly benefit from palliative care, and yet it can be a delicate conversation to help the patient and their family know that that doesn't mean that we want to prevent them from having treatments, active treatments to help them continue to live as long as they need, and that the goals aren't opposite one another, that we can be there for that journey and support them no matter what the time trajectory is. And so I think really helping people to understand that it doesn't put a timeline on things, and it doesn't stop them from accessing other treatments that are available. It's not just going to be palliative treatment.
Right.
So,
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of in addition to.
Yeah.
You know, it's in addition to all those things. And I do think there's still this big thing about palliative care. You know, for many people, it is so scary.
I was just going to say that when you hear the words palliative care, immediately you panic.
Yeah.
You really do. You think, okay, well, then this must be the end.
Yeah.
When in fact it enhances the last bit of your life. It really does. Palliative care can help you live a more fuller life to the end. And that's I think the message we really need to get across, people not to be so afraid, because there are more things there to help them have a better life to the end.
I think it can bring so much hope, actually, when you introduce palliative care. I mean, just first of all, people realize that it is not so scary. I sometimes go into a home and, you know, I'll initially ask, do you know what palliative care is? I always check because many people don't. Or if they do, you know, I arrive there, they think I'm the angel of death. And I'm sure you experience that same thing, Barbara. But, you know, I think once you explain to them that it is about managing what they physically experience as a physician, that is what we focus on a lot. Really meticulous assessment and management of their symptoms, pain and all the other things that they might experience, and that we can bring in members of the team to help with all these other aspects. I mean, David, please clone yourself, we want you.
I know.
But, you know, those are the kind of all the, we always say that it really takes, you know how they always say it takes a village to raise a child?
It does.
It takes a village and a strong team to help somebody die, perhaps a beautiful death, if we can say it like that.
When you say these things, it gives hope, and it's a beautiful thing. This is not talked about. And that's the whole point of events like this, right? Because that it does give a different perspective. David, for you, when you hear that if someone is afraid when they have a difficult diagnosis and they're scared and they're afraid about the end of their life, what's your advice?
I first normalize that and say, of course you are. Let's work with that fear, because you have a beautiful life. You have so much that you're having to say farewell to. But then just that sharing of the story, processing that fear, right? Saying the unspoken words, right? They'll often open up a lot more to me than they will to their family members, talking about their deepest fears. With palliative care, you're getting a trip with as little turbulence as possible. And I always encourage patients to think of it this way, influenced by my father. You're the captain of the ship. We're the crew. And you tell us exactly what's going on, and we will jump to it. All right. And there's good research that actually shows that people under palliative care live longer than if they didn't take palliative care. One of the big things, one of the biggest gifts of palliative care is that practical aspect of pain management. I find so many people are reluctant to take pain medication because they fear they're going to get addicted, right? Or that they'll just become unconscious. Palliative care can guide you in using pain medication to stay ahead of the pain and make the trip really smooth, maximizing your quality and conversations with your loved ones. Yeah.
David, earlier in your talk this evening, you were talking about it was the 4 things to say to people, and your audio cut out just a little bit. Would you mind reminding us what the 4 things are? We would love to hear them.
Sure. Thank you. I love you. Forgive me. and goodbye. You know that those are the 4 words to say all the time, not only in words, but also in actions, in eye contact, in gestures, in a touch of the hand, but expressing that gratitude, that release, that reconciliation, and then saying the truth, I'm leaving. It lifts everybody up.
Yeah. How does someone access palliative care? So again, we did speak about the navigation, but when you're put in that situation, it obviously seems very overwhelming. So does someone speak with their family doctor typically, or where do you start?
Well, definitely if they have a family doctor, that's a really good place to start, because they would be, if that family doctor doesn't do a lot of palliative care, they would be able to connect with the people in the community who can help, and help with connecting with home care, or even just knowing about organizations like SASHA. If the patient doesn't have a family doctor, then and they're really not connected anywhere yet, then if they could even phone HealthLink, right? Because that's a central place that they would know the different services that were available, and maybe at least get them started in the right direction. But for someone to have a diagnosis, they have to have a doctor or a team somewhere in the system. And so I think just asking the question, and that would get it started. Right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, quite typically what happens is when they're discharged from the cancer hospital, then they are sent to often a physician to see. But if not, then very often a home care referral is done. And in the Edmonton zone, we have a wonderful home care team. The program runs very well for people who are palliative. And then once they're in a home setting, if they are under the palliative designation, if things turn that they need to have more care than what can be provided in the home, then home care does make the referral for a hospice bed in a facility, if that's what was needed.
Okay. I believe we do have a question from our Q&A. Maybe, David, I will toss this your way first, and then we can discuss in here. The question is, what advice do you have if death is sudden, leaving the process feeling unfinished for those left behind?
Yes, you didn't get a chance to say those 4 most important words, right? So there's all this unfinished business. I would strongly encourage you to, if not see a grief counselor, because I recognize it can be difficult to connect to one, then to do some intentional rituals in order to say those 4 most important things. So one of them is write a letter to your loved one who has died. Write it with your pen in your hand, not typing it, and just pour your heart out. Say everything you wish that you had said. Just keep on going. Then when you feel you've done that, put the paper to the side, take a few breaths, get a fresh piece of paper, and write their response back to you. Don't think about it. Just start writing their response back to you. Dear, your name, and then off you go. It is surprising. You're not trying to figure out, am I connecting to that person's soul? You're trying to process the unfinished love stories that are locked up inside. You're also trying to give voice, perhaps, to pain, emotional pain that may have been in the relationship, right? This is about the forgiveness and reconciliation, which is coming back to yourself. I want to acknowledge this may be one of the hardest things in the world. It is the hardest thing in the world to die, but then when we lose someone suddenly, don't process that quickly. Take your time and use some rituals, go through the stories, and begin to share with someone you trust.
Wow, that is a wonderful idea. How about in the room here? Are there any thoughts to this situation? It happens, and I'm sure many people have felt this, that I didn't get to say goodbye. I didn't get to say I'm sorry. What is your advice for people going through this? Who would like to start?
I think sometimes just listening, allowing them to talk, and acknowledging that it is so difficult and that they've really got cheated on something that's really important. And I've lost my train of thought.
It's okay.
Yeah, I think just listening and validating them. And sometimes they feel guilty because they did have that relationship for some time and they should appreciate what they did have. And I'm like, oh, it doesn't take away the good that you had, to just acknowledge that this part is really difficult and real. So
some of it is perhaps also our own expectations. You know, I think when we do think about death, we think about this very peaceful process where we all have time to say goodbye. And perhaps part of it is also acknowledging to ourselves that our expectations, who told us it was going to be like that?
Right.
That it is part of life, that it doesn't always happen like that, that death comes in its own way. And part of it is acceptance that, you know, I love David's idea. I think something practical like that will take the sting out of it for sure. But it is unfortunately for many people that is the reality.
Throughout this evening, I feel like, at least in my mind, I've been thinking a lot of people who are maybe a little bit older when we're talking about palliative care and dying. But a question has come in, and I think it's a really important one. So I will read it out loud. What about small children who have been diagnosed with a terminal illness? How do you handle discussions with them? Who would like to start that?
Yeah, you know what, I have to be honest. In our practice here, we only work with people from the age of 18 onwards. And so I don't have a lot of experience with small children who have a terminal illness. I'm wondering if any of the others,
Or
do you have
David,
any experiences, David?
Yeah.
I did provide care for a few years at the Children's Hospital here in Halifax, and found that the children usually have profound wisdom and the listening skills, asking questions. What do you understand is happening? What do you think is going to happen? The children usually have greater wisdom and courage than the parents do. Then there are some tools to use, some wonderful books. There's an old classic, Leo Buscaglia wrote, Freddie the Leaf, right? And it explains death. There are some various tools that you can get online, little books like that. But the critical thing is to open up, to make a safe environment for a child to talk. And when they ask the questions, am I going to die? Be honest. Be honest. And you can say, yes. But the way you say that tenderly holds the space, and then embrace that child. If they're weeping, you don't want to fix that emotion. They're processing it. And you hold them in your love, and you let yourself be shattered by it. That is ultimately the only way to feel authentic. This is the ultimate event and the most difficult one. So it will be heartbreaking, and there will be astonishing moments of conversation and wisdom.
But be honest. Yeah, good
Yeah.
advice. David, this next question is for you, and it has to do with, I think this was something earlier in your talk. So I'll just read out the question here. So it says, David, the audio was cut out when you had 4 pictures shown. So the first picture was a person thinking. That is what wasn't heard. The second, you know what I'm talking about. The second picture was ICU, suffering, and final frontier. So what was the first slide there? The first picture.
So the 4 main concerns of someone who is facing the end of life. The first one is concern about their loved ones. They're worried about the emotional burden upon those that they care for. So it's a testament to their noble, their beautiful heart. They're worried about those who love them, but they're the one who's dying. The second concern is, how will I suffer as this disease process takes its course, and then what can be done to manage that. The third picture is unfinished business, right? The unfinished conversations, the unfinished dreams. And the final concern, you'd think it'd be number one, but it's not, is what's on the other side? Well, that bumps up to number two, but I find that concern for the loved ones remains the priority in so many hearts. And I'm simply inspired by that. They're teaching me how to love. Grief is the price we pay for love, and I affirm the beauty of their character.
Thank you for sharing that. If it's okay, would we be able to talk a little bit more about SASHA? Because I believe that everyone at home would like to know, okay, so what exactly can SASHA do for me? How can I get involved? Chris, I will let you take it away.
To talk about SASHA.
I knew it. I thought I picked the right person.
I've been waiting.
Yeah.
So SASHA is a volunteer-run organization, and we have developed some great programs in the community. One of the programs we develop is the Compassionate Care Volunteer Program. So we have volunteers who are trained using the Canadian Hospice Palliative Training material. It's a very intensive course. Depending on how many people we train at a time, it can be a full 2 days or more. We have lots of time for discussion. There's always tears to be had while we go through this training course. But these volunteers are trained to speak with and support people in the community who are end of life. And as you said, Ingrid, they're not all cancer. There's all sorts of different diagnoses out there, dementia, heart failure, lots of different end of life situations. So the volunteers can go out and they can offer respite for the caregiver, companionship for the person who is ill, and also do resource sharing. So they can help with some of the navigation of the system. What the volunteers don't know, then the coordinators like myself would assist in finding the information for them. They also will support caregivers by telephone support. We did that during COVID times so that we weren't going into homes, but we could still speak with people over the phone. We've got one caregiver that we've had for over a year now, giving telephone support, and she's really appreciated that. We've met caregivers in a coffee shop just so they can get out of the home for a little bit. So lots of different things like that that we can do. To become a volunteer?
I was going to say.
Yeah.
And do you need volunteers?
We always are looking for volunteers, but we need the right volunteers. If anybody caught the little video we did prior to this, that was one of the things I said. We're very picky about our volunteers. We go through an interview process. We check references. We are very sure we have the right people to volunteer. So if you wanted to volunteer, you would go onto our website, so sasha-cares.com, and there is an application process to go through. Then one of us, again, the coordinators, would look at your applicant and have a discussion to see how that seems to fit. And if it looks like a good match, then we will certainly do an interview and look at training. We do the training sessions 1 or 2 a year, depending on what our needs are for volunteers.
Wonderful. Lots of good
and
information.
it is a free service. We do not charge for this. We want to support people in the community.
You don't want to add to the financial burden that is already
not.
there. Yeah.
And the other interesting thing, just one more comment,
No, please.
is the volunteers do follow if the family and the ill person wishes it, we will follow the person from the home to, let's say, hospital and then to hospice. We've done all of that, and really has been a huge support for the family and for the end-of-life person.
How long has the organization been around now?
We have been an organization officially for 9 years now.
Okay.
Yes.
Wonderful.
This program's been working for, I'm going to say 4 years, I think, but COVID kind of set us back a little.
Oh,
but we're building it again.
It did that. Yeah.
Did that for lots of things. Yeah.
Okay, I see we have another question that has come in. So I will read it out here. How do you support a person who is dying who doesn't seem willing to be open to these important discussions? I think that is something that likely happens a lot. These are difficult discussions. Ingrid, would you like to start?
I certainly can give it a go with support from my panel members.
Yes, we're here to support each other.
Exactly. You know, I do think that the whole acceptance and this, it is part of the journey. It doesn't, today I might not seem willing to be open to these discussions because I'm still doing some work in my own head, but perhaps in a week from now it might be different. I do think that it is, you know, there are different stages for each one on this journey of finding peace with your end that is approaching, and it's different for each person. And I think over the years, I've certainly learned, you know, that it used to be this term denial. He or she is in denial. And we would all go, oh, they're in denial. But you know what? I think it is natural. I think that normal. I think that a person can only take in as much as they can at one stage, at one time. And I think that is very different for each one of us. So I think one has to just go with them and not force them. Right?
Yeah, and let's remember that people will tend to die the same way that they live. Their personalities will stay consistent. So be patient, be available, be open. Don't try to fill the space with words. Sit in silence, because eventually that'll make them uncomfortable and they're going to crack. Right? And be loving.
Be loving, right. Okay, we have one last question here that has come in from the Q of A. When someone is passing on and is non-responsive, do you think they can hear you speaking to them? David, you're nodding, so I feel like you have an answer.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Now, there's some interesting research that indicates that hearing is the last thing to fade. But I trust that there is a mystical dimension to their perception. They have descended to the deepest realms of consciousness, but that does not mean you can't reach them. In fact, while the medical team and the palliative team are there to make sure that that person is comfortable, I trust that only the words of those who love that person can make them feel truly safe. And those words will reach to the core. So involve them in the conversations that you're having. I did that today. I turned to the patient who's unconscious. I said, Harold, it's so good that you can be listening to us without interrupting. We're just going to watch you blush because we're not going to stop talking you up. And I actually said, if, they said, I'm sure he's going to watch over me. And I turned to him and I said, well, if you do that, if you're watching over them, don't freak them out, okay? You behave yourself, right? And that's light and jovial, but we also talked about them still saying, I love you, and thanks, Dad, for taking me on that trip. And oh, it's so beautiful and heartbreaking, but important.
Wow. Well, these are important things to talk about. We don't want to say the words palliative care or dying or death. So thank you all so much for your time tonight and your insight and your expertise. David, thank you so much for being here and sharing everything that you have tonight. It's been also very personal for you. So, but I can see how that has a huge impact when you speak and you share your own personal story. So we appreciate you and thank you so much. And I think it's probably 11 p.m. or more, maybe almost what time is it?
It's 11:35.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for staying up for all of us.
Thank you for having me.
It's been our pleasure.
May I just say one thing?
Please.
As somebody who works within Alberta Health Services, I really want to give kudos to SASHA. Every time I listen to you, I listen to your members, I hear what you're doing. I think you're such an example and we want to follow your lead. So yes, you guys are doing amazing work. Really.
Thank you very much.
Kudos to SASHA.
That's very nice, thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you, David, so much. We've just appreciated you being with us this evening. Just a reminder that David's book, Beyond Surviving, is available at Indigo Books and online through Amazon. You can also find it at davidmaginley.com. Once again, events like this are only possible through the generous support of sponsors. One more thank you to Nuvo Dental, the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta, JetPro, and the St. Albert Community Foundation, as well, of course, the gold and silver level sponsors. So tomorrow, please watch your emails, as SASHA will be sending out a brief survey and would appreciate your feedback about this evening's event. All those who return the survey will be entered to win a copy of David's book. Okay, well, that is it for all of us tonight. Thank you so much for being here with us, and have a good evening.